All right, it's 5 o'clock, and I just heard the words recording in progress over my computer speakers, so I think we can go ahead and kick it off. Um, Before I do, though, to the moderator, I noticed that there are some attendees that are part of the development team, and I'm not sure if they need to be elevated to the level of panelist. Um, Perhaps that's something Elena or Kara can communicate with Susanna about while I start off the presentation.
You got it.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Well, on behalf of the town of Estes Park and our development partners, America West Housing Solutions and Consolidated Housing Solutions, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. To learn more about the proposed workforce housing development that we're hoping is going to be constructed on the town-owned Fish Hatchery property located off of Fall River Road, up towards the northern entrance of Rocky Mountain National Park. Tonight, the presentation is going to cover information on current housing needs in the Estes Valley, which, as I'm sure all of you recognize, are pretty dire right now. Some history about the fish hatchery site, what the process entails for developing workforce housing out there, where we are in the process, and next steps. It's important to note that we are right now at the very beginning stages of the planning process, and our primary goal this evening is to share information with you, to listen to your input and feedback, and to respond to questions to the extent we're able to. Because of where we are in the process, we might not have answers to all of the questions that we hear today. But we are recording this meeting. We're recording questions that are included in the Q&A feature, and we'll be responding verbally to questions as we're able towards the end of the presentation. And we have staff on hand taking notes to make sure that nothing is missed. Again, our plan is to hear your input now and be able to use that as we shape what this development could look like moving forward. So just so you're more familiar with some of the people that you'll be hearing from who are working on this project from the beginning through the end. I am Jason Danweber. I'm the Assistant Town Administrator here in the town of Estes Park, and I'm serving as our project manager on behalf of the town for the project. And I'm working hand in hand with Naomi Hoff, who is on the call, and you'll be hearing from her in a few slides. Actually, she'll be speaking more to the about the housing needs in the Estes Valley. She is the executive director of the Estes Park Housing Authority. And then below myself and Naomi is the development team. It consists of Keith Meyer, Kelly Harabe, George Burt, Jim Potter, Gary Prager, Joseph Sammarturino. I hope I said that right. Elena Scott and Kara Skohe. Many of them will be on the call tonight as well, and some of them may be able to better address questions or feedback that we hear as members of the development team. We, to be clear, this has been called the Fish Hatchery Project because that's where it's going to be located. And as I mentioned before, the development partners are officially America West Housing Solutions and Consolidated Housing Solutions. But we are calling this project moving forward the Homes at Fish Hatchery. So when you hear Homes at Fish Hatchery or the Fish Hatchery Project or the Workforce Housing Project between the town and America West, those are all referring to the Homes at Fish Hatchery. So with that intro having been given, I will turn it over to either Elena or Kara from the development team to talk a little bit more in depth about our agenda for tonight.
Good evening. This is Kara with Norris Design. And we are the planners and landscape architects on the project. So tonight we're going to start with logistics. So that is your opportunities for input, how to raise your hand and ask a question, how to interact with the presentation. We'll be going through that. We're going to talk about housing needs. We're going to talk about relevant planning and design and demographics. We're going to go through the fish hatchery site history as well as our site analysis. And then we're also going to go through town requirements and our next steps and the project schedule. All right, as far as the logistics go, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's website here. We will be updating information on the website regularly, so you can visit the site throughout the project and be kept informed of what's going on. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions or raise your hand, and we will be opening it up for questions and discussion at the end of the presentation. If you're calling in and don't have a screen, you can dial *9 to raise or lower your hand. You can also email questions directly to Jason Damweber, and his email is right here. And if you would like to provide comments online, you can use the QR code in the lower left corner. It will be on several of our sites, and it will also be included on the town's website. So just to orient you a little bit, the area in yellow is our project site. You can see Highway 34 or Fall River Road runs east and west and heads up into Rocky Mountain National Park and then also back into town. You can also see where the Fall River Visitor Center is right above our site, and Rocky Mountain National Park basically surrounds us on the south, west, and north sides. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Naomi with the Housing Authority, and she's going to go through some of the housing needs for Estes Park.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to spend this time with you, and thanks for joining in. In partnership with several different entities in the Estes Valley, the Estes Park Housing Authority has completed 4 housing needs assessments as listed here in 1990, 99, 2008, and 2016. And each one identified the number of housing units needed to keep up with demand. And on average, that need really settled between 800 and 1,000 units between each of those housing needs assessments. So I'll talk about the first 2 for a moment. The first 2 assessments, the community built more units than the needs assessment identified. So in 1990, the need was 790 units, and the community built 1,502. In 99, the need was 1,032, and over 1,100 were built. And in 2008 is where we began to lose ground. The economic downturn certainly played a part, as well as our 2013 flood. So in 2008, the need was identified as 959 housing units, but we only built about half of that, 439. So this takes me to the 26 housing needs assessment. And the needs assessment gave us information to 2020. It provided not only the keep-up need, but the catch-up need as well. And it highlighted several strategies, which I'll share in just a moment. So the keep-up need was identified between 800 and 1,000 units. And this variation was really due to the anticipated number of new jobs created. And then on top of that was the catch-up need to catch up to where we should be. And that was roughly about 670 units. The total identified need for the 2016 housing needs assessment was 1,690 units. Since that assessment, approximately 64 units have been developed and have come out of the ground. This includes some properties such as Grand Estates, Stanley Avenue, there's 2 properties there, Colorado, which is where Jimmy John's is, Peakview on Highway 7, and Habitat for Humanity created a few units. In addition, you all may know there's another 182 units that are approved, and that's through the project also on Highway 7 called the Prospector. 94 units are planned there. And the Wildfire condos, which will bring 88 workforce housing units. The needs assessment identified that 40% of that need should be in home ownership, and the other 60% should be in rental options. The housing options should, as identified in the needs assessment, should support higher incomes. And for those that can afford rental prices at $1,250 and home ownership prices at $350,000 and above. Now keep in mind that was 2016 numbers, and quite a bit has happened. We've known those numbers have gone up quite a bit since then. There were 11 strategies that were identified. And in the past years, the town and other community entities have supported some changes that have taken place. And those include draft and adopt workforce housing guidelines. We've seen that in our community. Continue apartment development and redevelopment, clearly in the development that's been created. Amend town code to allow and encourage workforce housing. And we saw that through incentives such as increased density opportunities and being able to develop up to 3 stories for multifamily zoned residential areas. And also create workforce housing fund with a dedicated revenue source. Another one that was identified as a strategy was to utilize town-owned land for workforce housing. And this is where the Fish Hatchery site comes to the surface as options. Now on the next slide, real briefly, why is this important? Why is filling the housing gap necessary? And in short, it ensures the success of this community's future. Our community is full of resilient people that have worked hard to live here, generations that have history here, people who have survived floods and fires. We are an entrepreneurial community with homegrown businesses with character and interest. And we live here and host visitors here, both of which come to enjoy the greatness of the mountains in our community. To ensure our continued success, we must be able to offer a wide variety of housing options to allow those that wish to serve, contribute, and participate in this community to become vested in this community. So that's a little bit of a high, broad stroke over the housing needs of the 2016 needs assessment.
All right, so as we go through this process, what you need to know is that the town is currently underway with a comprehensive plan update. You can find more information on this or get involved at engageestes.org. You can also find a lot of this information in the 2020 census update. So right now we're going to go through some of the key demographic items, just because it's important to understand the context of the community as we plan our site. So the town of Estes Park is the oldest community in Colorado with an average age of 51 years old in 2010. The 2020 census showed that the median age in Estes is now 61, with a current population of 5,904. The community is losing families and young and middle-aged households. These are the primary workforce households in Estes. Over the past 5 years, only about 14 housing units have been added per year in the town of Estes Park, 70 units total in 5 years, not all of which are workforce housing. The incomes of workforce households in Estes Park are lower than the median incomes for Limerick County, which is important when considering housing affordability.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Elena Scott here. I'm going to take over for Kara for a few slides on demographics. And just a note to anybody who's on the meeting who was able to visit with us Saturday, thank you so much for being there and for also being here tonight. We truly appreciate your participation. Housing and homes in Estes Park are increasingly owned by second homeowners. We're all aware of this fact. We see it every day in our neighborhoods. And those second homeowners are competing for housing at the same time as locals. The housing is also aging, with repairs costly for local workers. So we have a bunch of things combining into one situation here, which are making it a lot harder for the local workforce to make it in our community. As we stated before, development hasn't been keeping pace with growth and demand, resulting in shortages in rental and ownership and also increasing costs. And then the percentage of residential units occupied by locals keeps declining. We have the statistics from 2010 or 2000 to 2010, and those statistics are being updated for the last decade as well. That we'll be able to provide that very soon. Only 3% of the housing units in Estes are restricted with price caps and income targets, and that's important for all the reasons stated above, that it's just harder to compete in this market for the local workforce. From an economics perspective, our economy is growing, commercial development's growing, and this is just exacerbating the issue and the need for more workforce housing to meet those job demands. We have had stronger job growth in the county overall since 2011. Our employment rate is a little lower than the state average, and this has to be due to our high amount of retirement population. We're at about 47.9% of the people that live in Estes are employed. The state average is about 65%. So it's a different community, and that's why it's important for context to really see specifics to Estes Park and how to make a difference in workforce housing in our community. We have a high seasonality in employment, and 3,000 jobs are filled each summer to meet those employment needs. There are a lot of low-paying tourism service positions, which is resulting in a lot more of inbound commuting into our community. We see that in transportation and the roads networks that come into Estes. And so transportation and housing are related. Employee retainment and keeping jobs is continually becoming a challenge for employers. And we're really here to help make a difference. And we know there's a balance needed, and that it's important for us to understand that context and the demographics of where we are and where we're headed. If you do want more information and some of those statistics, there's great information from the comprehensive planning team on engageestes.org. Again, and you can also interact with that process and get more information, but some great data there for you to look at. With that, I'll pass it back to Jason to talk a little bit more about the site.
Thanks, Elena. So many of you are probably already familiar with the history of the site. It was built, the Fish Hatchery was built and opened in 1907. And it was a community effort undertaken by the Estes Park Protective and Improvement Association to promote tourism. At the time, it was considered very successful, especially since it was located on the way to Horseshoe Park. So it was a place people stopped by to check out and see the fish hatching while they before they continued on into Rocky Mountain National Park. Within a few years, by 1909, there were a series of new structures and ponds that were constructed or dug for the purpose of hatching fish. And further construction was done. A few new buildings were added and ponds later on in the 1920s, in 1928 and 29. Also in 1909, the electric hydro plant was built there by F.O. Stanley to power his then brand new hotel, one of the first hotels in the country to have electricity. Some of the original equipment can still be seen there at the museum. That's actually where we held the open house on Saturday. So some folks got to see the old machinery that was used to provide power from the river. That equipment was actually, some of that equipment was actually used up until the early 1980s, when in 1982, the Lawn Lake flood took out the dam and rendered the hydroelectric plant no longer usable. I actually met somebody at the open house who worked at the fish hatchery hatching fish at some point, presumably in the 70s or early 80s, when it was still in operation. So folks know the plan is for the museum to remain in operation during and after the development of the homes at Fish Hatchery. And so too will the residence. There's a historical residence located right next to the hydro plant that's actually on the National Register, and that has to remain in place. Other existing buildings on the site will likely be demolished to make way for construction of the new homes. There are, I believe, 4 single-family residences, one of which is used for town storage. In fact, that's where we keep a lot of the holiday lighting and decorations. That will also be demolished as part of this project to make way for additional workforce housing. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Elena, I believe, to discuss the site and existing conditions.
Actually, I'll go ahead and take that one. All right, so here is our site, our current site conditions. So again, Highway 34 or Fall River Road is on the north side of our site and runs east-west up into Rocky Mountain National Park or back into town. And then coming in to the site, you come right in next to the old water treatment facility and the historic hydro plant museum. And then you can also see the Estes Park employment rental units that Jason was just talking about. We also have highlighted in dark blue exactly where Fall River is, as well as the lighter blue that demarcates the floodplain. And then we also have the bright green color where we know that wetlands are located. So these are all of the things we look at as we get into the site design. And looking at where things will fit and work out the best. So the next slide, we get into our slope analysis and floodplain and understanding what kind of topography we're working with. So when you see the dark green to the very light green color, those are the slopes that we want to work with. They're not as steep, and those are the areas you want to be. As you get into orange and the dark red, those are the areas that we're going to stay away from and that we know would be the most difficult to develop on. And again, just going into the importance of, we understand all of the site factors. We know there are many things that we need to look at as we go through site design as it relates to the environment and infrastructure. So we'll be looking at all of this as we get into updating the concept site plan. So the next slide, kind of from a high level, shows our proposed development areas. So we are currently focusing on the phase 1 area, which is on the upper right-hand side of the site and is over the area that the town currently owns rentals on where people live. The town also owns the area south of the river, which is a potential future phase opportunity. But for now, we're focusing only on the phase 1 area. So this is a high level conceptual site plan where we are showing a proposed layout of buildings. We're showing approximately 190 units here on this layout. There will also be room for childcare here. There will also be a park and playground area. We also will be looking at the entrance off of Highway 34 and all of the connectors throughout the site. We understand that a lot of those may need improvement. So yeah, that's just kind of that high level look. In terms of the process that we'll be going through, we'll be going through all of the town requirements. We have completed a survey of the site. And again, we will be planning for the environmental and geotechnical testing that has to take place. America West Housing Solutions is working with the town on the development agreement, and we are in the process of preparing a pre-development application. As far as future studies and analysis, we will be looking at the conceptual site plan again and just updating that and looking at other things that may factor into the layout. We'll be looking at architectural design and site character. We'll be doing a traffic impact study for the site, as well as looking at infrastructure design. And just moving forward with the project, as Jason mentioned, we are in the very preliminary phase of this, and information on the project will be regularly updated on the website. As we move through the design process, there will be several more opportunities for public input and involvement. As mentioned, we had our in-person meeting on Saturday. We have tonight's meeting, and then in the future, there will be additional stakeholder interviews. We will have a design charrette, and we'll be working through different design alternatives to come to a preferred one that, again, will be viewed by the public in an open house. And then as the project moves, through that conceptual design phase and we get to that preferred option, we will then go through the town approval process where there's formal review and additional input, and eventually it will go to public hearing. And then our proposed timeframe in terms of more detailed drawings and getting into construction documents, we're targeting the spring of 2023 and hoping to begin construction of phase 1 sometime in late 2023 or 2024. And I am going to turn it back over to Jason, and he's going to go through some of what we heard at our meeting on Saturday morning.
Yep, thanks, Kara. And just one other note on with respect to the slide on the preliminary concept design. We are, as Kara mentioned, looking at the north side of the river right now. The property is about 68 acres, and we're looking at developing in the first phase, which is the subject of the development agreement that we're currently negotiating with our development partner, about 20 acres, 18 to 20 acres. Right now we're envisioning about 190 apartment units on that site, and somewhere in the ballpark of about a dozen buildings. That's somewhat of a magic number, as it were, based on our modeling with respect to water infrastructure and sanitation infrastructure. That is about what that site could accommodate with minimal improvements needed. Any development on the south side of the river would require significant infrastructure upgrades to both water and sanitary sewer. Water would require a new water tank, an access road to get up there, all new piping. When we were projecting costs for that work a couple of years ago, it was in the ballpark of about $2 million. Given the way prices have increased for construction materials in the past couple of years, I expect that that's only jumped. Development on the south side of the river will be a completely separate development agreement process. And I think that's important to note, because really what we're talking about is that about 20 acres on the north side of the river, labeled as phase 1. So on Saturday, we actually had a great meeting. It was a lovely day out at the hydro plant. Pretty good turnout. I'd say there were about 40 people there total, including the town staff and housing authority staff and the development team. So probably about 30 members of the public dropped in, shared their thoughts, asked questions, looked at the materials that we had available. I think the biggest things that I heard in the couple dozen people that I spoke to directly was a recognition of the need for workforce housing here in the Estes Valley. I heard references several times to reports that we've seen in other mountain communities that have even more dire situations than we do here in the Estes Valley, and the recognition that we can get there, we could get there if we don't do something now. And that's one of the reasons why time is such a significant factor here, and why we're hoping to push this project forward as soon as possible. The next largest or most frequent thing that I heard was about traffic. If we're putting 190 units here, how are we going to accommodate traffic within the development on Fish Hatchery Road and along Fall River Road? An absolutely legitimate concern, and something that we need more information so that we can figure out how we can adequately address traffic impacts associated with the development. That's what there was referenced earlier, traffic impact analysis, and that's something that will occur. We are also very well aware that Rocky Mountain National Park is going to be doing construction on the Fall River entrance, not far at all from this site, and will certainly need to control for that depending on the timing of the traffic impact analysis. We also heard support for different scales of apartments, from 1 to 2 to 3 bedrooms. Interesting, we've learned from experience that those 1 bedrooms are in the highest demand. So it won't at all surprise me if we see a majority of these as 1 bedroom units. I've already mentioned traffic. And also with respect to traffic, I heard many times interest in some sort of shuttle service or extended transit service out to this site. That's actually something that town staff has been ruminating about as we have our parking and transit conversations, where we can extend transit services and how that would work and how it would be paid for, things like that, especially as it relates to this development. That's some sort of shuttle or transit service out to that site is good for a number of reasons, including and especially it helps ease traffic congestion associated with the development here. And there's a possibility that it could be extended and into the park or to the visitor center or something like that. Lots of conversations still have to happen, and lots of information still needs to be gathered. We certainly heard concern about the possibility of noise and light pollution, which would need to be addressed throughout the planning process. Infrastructure availability. I talked a little bit about water and sewer earlier. We also heard interest in having better cell service and broadband being extended out there. We heard concerns about impacts on wildlife that migrate or otherwise are in the vicinity of the fish hatchery property, as well as impacts of development in that area on the river and down the river. Stormwater runoff is something that will have to be addressed as part of the planning process. I've actually heard, with respect to density and number of units, things like, well, we need to dramatically reduce the number that's being proposed from what I mentioned earlier, that 190. But I also heard, why are we only building 190 units there? Why aren't we building 400? So I think there was a wide range of interest being expressed there at the open house. And we heard from a number of people that it's going to be important, and we absolutely recognize that, to ensure that the community remains not only in the loop, but actively engaged in the process as it moves forward. Transparency is critical in this project, and it is critical in all things that the town does. We are going to use that estes.org/fish hatchery website as kind of our landing pad for information as it becomes available. You can go and see what information is currently available there as we get the results of some of the studies that we expect when that will be needed as part of the process for planning for this development. We'll also share that information there. Things like the environmental phase 1 tests and the traffic impact analysis results, things like that. And just to get into this next slide regarding feedback, as was mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, today's meeting is being recorded and will be posted to that website. So if you know folks who are interested in attending but were not able to for whatever reason, they can go and view this presentation. Again, it's a pretty high level overview because that's where we are in the process right now, but I think it's pretty informative, especially for someone who's just being introduced to this project. We'll go ahead, and I believe we're going to be moving into question and answers. I see that there are a number of questions that have already been entered. We'll go through those in the order that they were received. If you prefer to ask a question verbally, you can raise your hand. If you're calling in and not using the Zoom platform, you can dial *9, not #9, but *9, *9, I guess, to raise and lower your hand. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, I'm serving as the town's project manager for the project, and you can always email me directly. My contact information is also on the website. My email address is right here. Finally, before we get to the Q&A, you can use the QR code that's here in this presentation, and you can use that to provide comments online. And that's one way that we can receive feedback as well. So let's see here.
Do you want me to keep this slide up, Jason, or should I just put our faces back up?
No, I think it's good to keep that slide up there. And
Okay.
I guess I can, I'm not sure what the best way to do this is. I can go through the questions that we've received in writing and answer them. I don't see any hands up, so that may be the best way. Depending on the questions, I haven't seen any of them yet, except for the first one, because I just pulled it up. I may be deferring to other members of the development team to respond.
I do have one hand raised. If you'd like me to go ahead and start with a live question.
Okay, sure, we can do that. I have no idea if that hand was up. I don't know the order in which people were indicating that they were interested in asking questions. So if there's only one hand up, that's fine. Let's start with that.
Okay, now we've got two. Rod Morton, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. Okay, you should be able to
You're
talk.
talking, we can't hear you. There you are.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
I hear noise, but I can't make out the words.
Okay, is that better?
Yes,
Yeah.
much better.
I'm sorry. Okay, taking input from the community. So my question would be, what level of negative input would you consider to not proceed with this project?
I think
Is there-
proceeding with the project is really, it's a town board decision whether or not to enter into a development agreement. And then this project has to go through the development review process that any project has to go through. So those are opportunities to weigh in with negative comments. But, as I mentioned, I'm the project manager and not really the decider. So I think that, that would be something that's up to the town board to decide.
Okay, so I mean, you mentioned something about a public hearing. So in other words, the input by the community, even if it is a majority of opposition, it would not matter. It doesn't matter. You're going to proceed anyway.
I'm not really sure how to respond to that question, other than to say that, that it's a town board decision whether or not to approve a development agreement and decide to proceed. And the same goes for the development review process and the town board's decision to approve the project.
Okay, I got that. So, I mean, in the bottom line then would be, doesn't really matter. What if the community agrees with this project or not? Because the town board's going to decide. You have the final authority, final decision making.
Well, I wouldn't say that the community's input doesn't matter at all. I would say that the feedback that we receive, we will be transmitting to the decision makers, and as part of the process for providing them with feedback. You all, as members of the public, can always share your thoughts with the elected officials and decision makers. This is not going up for a vote of the people, if that's what you're getting at.
Well, what I'm getting at, it doesn't, the input that the community provides isn't really consequential in the decision making.
Well, I think that it is consequential in the decision making, but again, this isn't a project that's going up for a vote of the people. So I think it's important, it's critical that you share your feedback with decision makers, and they use that to inform their decision making.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Red. You said there was one more hand up.
We have two more now. Karen, I'm going to allow you to speak.
And then I'll go to some of the written questions, because I know those.
Hi. I'm Karen. I live on Fish Hatchery Road. First question is, in the calculation, the 3,000 seasonal workers required in the town, what does that leave us with workforce housing needs if we take out the 3,000?
Naomi, do you want to field that question?
Housing needs assessment that was done in 2016 looked at year-round housing needs. That was the 1,690 number. That was the housing needs for year-round community need. The 3,000 seasonal workforce members, that's just how many seasonal employees come into our community, at least as of the data in 2016. So one number was housing units that addressed year-round. The 3,000 was just how many positions or people come into the community to fill those positions over the seasonal time frame. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and it's still up in the air about how many seasonal workers this workforce housing development will cater to. One of the requirements in the town code for workforce housing, and it will be a requirement of this development, in order to live there, you have to be actively employed and working in the Estes Valley for at least 30 hours a week, year round.
Okay, my second question then is kind of going off of what was the caller before. This is a town-owned project, and the town approves the project, the town developing the project. I just question where the objectivity is when it's, you kind of come at it from every angle, and you pulled the strings on this one. Whereas when I developed, I had to kind of go to outsourcing. I had to go through different chains. And this seems like the town owns it, the town's developing it, the town's approving it, I'm just looking for objective perspective on this and like an answer on that.
Sure, yeah, and I wish we had somebody from our community development department that could speak better than I can to the process here. But there is involvement by the Planning Commission and our community development director, who is a reviewer in the development review process, has not been involved in this project deliberately because of that review and approval role that she has, and nor has the town administrator, other than being kept in the know and abreast of where things are in the process. So Karen, that's something that I certainly understand where you're coming from, and we're being as transparent as we can, and will continue to be throughout the process. I know that doesn't directly answer your question, but I think that's the best I can do unless one of the other panelists can speak to that question.
There's a third-party developer involved, and that went through a selection process. And, it's all a matter of balancing the needs of the housing along with thinking about what the site can handle. And so the team will be required to go through the same development review process that any developer would have to go through, and do the same hearings and all of those things. I think that since it is a town project, this is why we're having this meeting today and why we had the meeting Saturday, and that an effort to really communicate with stakeholders and adjacent residents, employers, all the people that make up the community of Estes. That's why we're having these meetings and able to listen. And so I think that we can put out some more information on that process on the website, so that with the schedule what types of processes we'll be going through, which will lead to hearing. I hope that helps.
It helps. It's a little concerning because it doesn't matter, because ultimately the town gets to make the decision on its own project. But I'll put that aside. Lastly, I just want to emphasize that what I hear is very little input and emphasis on the impact on the river. And having lived on the river and had a home on the river all my life, I'm very concerned about the impact of this kind of density on our river. We don't have natural resources being developed by God anymore that I understand of. So I clearly am very concerned that we give more attention and address the impact. I live on the river. I see what goes on the river. I watch what people do to the river. The national park has put out in the paper last week about the impact that defecation is doing to the rivers. I watch it, being an owner on the river, what happens to our rivers. So I would like a little bit more concern and input given to that, because I think our natural resources are vital, even more vital than our need for housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions and for sharing your concerns, Karen. Appreciate it. So moving to some of the, and Susanna, please keep track of the order of the hand raising.
We've got one more person with their hand raised. Jerry Lauer, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to speak.
Okay, then I'll move on to the written questions.
Okay, my question has a number of different facets to it. I'm trying to figure out why this site was chosen versus any other site around town, for a couple of reasons. One, it's about 3 miles away from town, so the workforce would have to do a lot of traveling. And I suspect that the reason is because the town owns the property. But as you have talked a little bit about, owning the property isn't the only cost, and it's probably a minor cost. When you talk about having to redo the utilities and you're not sure about traffic and maybe traffic improvements, there'll be water and sewer changes. All of those things are additional costs that may be necessary because of this particular site versus the town having some other site. My understanding was there was a dry gulch site, and I don't know where that is or what's involved in that. And I don't know whether that would be less expensive to develop or not. There are also other sites. If you look at the Highway 66 headed toward the YMCA, you'll notice right there across from what's that bar?
Rock Inn.
The Rock Inn. There is some property across from the Rock Inn that looks like it should be torn down and replaced. And it would seem to me that the town could probably buy that property cheaper and do the improvements on it. But it just, no one's talked about why this particular site was picked versus something else, or what is so important about this site that makes it so much more in demand as far as the planners are concerned. And that's number one. Number two is the planners have only done work on this particular site, which again begs the question, which I think Rod Morton brought up, which is, has this already been decided? I mean, do we have no input at all on this to where it would make a difference? You would think that if you've got a developer looking at a site, you would have more than one site for them to look at if you're in the real preliminary stages. But that doesn't seem to be the case here. So I'd like to know why this site was picked versus some other options.
Yeah, so this is a site that has been looked at for a very long time as a potential site for workforce housing. And yes, one of the reasons that we're looking at this site is because it is a town-owned parcel, and it's one of few town-owned parcels that could accommodate this sort of development. You mentioned the Dry Gulch property. That is a fraction of the size of this one. I believe it's a little shy of 4 acres. It has access issues. So we were looking at properties where we could develop with some density in order to start making a dent in our very dire workforce housing needs here locally. We have, throughout the years, entertained the possibility of purchasing other properties for the purposes of developing workforce housing. The town boards talked about land swaps and things like that. And things have been either not available, too expensive, or for various other reasons, as I understand it, have not come to fruition. So hopefully that answers your question. Again, the site that we're looking at for these 190-ish workforce housing units is about 20 acres. And there simply are not a lot of other places that we could put this scale of workforce housing development in town. So thank you very much for your question. And we do hope that anybody who's interested in this project continues to stay engaged. There are no foregone conclusions. As has been stated several times, we're really at the beginning stages of this. Yes, a site has been identified, and through an open, public, and competitive process, a development partner was chosen. We've entered into an exclusive negotiation agreement with the developer, but that's really as far as we are. We're still in the process of working on a development agreement that will be going before the board, hopefully later this year, late spring, early summer timeframe. Hard to say. It just depends on when we can get there. So
Jason, Jerry Lauer did raise his hand again, but we also had one other individual raise her hand, Mary.
Okay, Susanna, those hands are coming up well after written comments have come in. So I'm going to go, or written questions. So I'm going to go to the written questions and address some of those, and then we can go back to the verbal questions. So the first question that we received, and there are timestamps here, so it makes it easy to tell when they came in. So it isn't apartments; it is actually single-family homes. No, it's the preliminary concept is for apartments of various sizes and somewhere around a dozen buildings. That may have been asked when I mentioned that this project is being coined as the homes at Fish Hatchery, but a home can be any type of unit. Let's see. And then the same person asked a question immediately after, will you be providing these assessment with the details on how they arrived at these numbers? And I actually responded with a link to the housing needs assessment that Naomi was going over when I think that question was asked.
Jason, it might be good before Naomi departs us for her next HOA meeting to talk about how how you qualify people to live in housing. There was a question about how do you know people really work here, and I know the Housing Authority has a pretty rigorous process to qualify people to live in homes. I know you're on your way out, but could you get us one more answer?
Thank you for catching that, Elena.
Sure. So the Housing Authority goes through an annual verification process. And for all workforce housing developments, we've entered into an agreement with the town of Estes Park to do that annual verification. We will go through and confirm or ask who are the occupants in the household. Let me back up, I'm sorry. The document that we collect is called an occupancy certificate or certificate of occupancy. So what's listed on it is all the members that are in the household. We'll collect that data. And then the other aspect is who is the individual that will be working year-round within the boundaries of the Estes Park School District. Once we have that information, we then will reach out to that employer to confirm the number of hours and that they are still working there. And that occurs annually and is required to be given at the time that person no longer meets the requirement. They have a window of time in which they must share that with the town, i.e. the Housing Authority is the third party that will complete that verification. So there is that window of time where they need to give us that update, and then we will request it every year annually. I saw that question, so I hope that answered it. I'm going to scroll back through and see if there's anything else there, but please chime in and let me know if there was an add to that.
Thanks, Naomi.
Yep, and thank you for catching that, because I know Naomi does have another meeting.
She does. She's got a busy night.
And then
I think part of that question, I just see it here on my screen. If they aren't meeting that requirement, are they forced to move out? In a rental opportunity, it will be that they will, if they are not meeting the requirements, they will not be permitted to live there. Now, in an effort to not create someone who's lost their job or lost hours and now is losing their housing, our agreement is they will be able to live out the term of their lease. And then after that time period, they will need to find other housing if they're not meeting the requirements.
Thank you. I do see a question about the studies that will be required to go through the process. And then another question from Nancy, who I met on Saturday. Hi, Nancy. About the process, and if you've never gone through it, just some clarifications about what all that entails. So the studies that will be required are required of any developer. Will be doing traffic impact, wetlands, there will be floodplain analysis, which is incredibly important to the community, other various requirements. And this is where we wish we had our ComDev team too, to tell us all the studies that we'll have to do. They will be rigorous. Those will be made available. All submittals are available to the public once they are made. We are just in a very early stage of the process. So the point here is that we're really understanding what the concerns are so that we can get ahead of those and make sure that as that information comes available, that you also have that information and can review it. From Nancy on the process, we are in the early stages, meaning we have a really high level concept plan that was required to be submitted with the proposal, the RFP, a request for proposal from the town by the developer. As Jason mentioned, well, if you go even further back, the RFP had been previously introduced and then was scaled back a little bit to make sure and look at the infrastructure requirements for the site as a whole. That's why the phase 1 area is in focus right now, because of its availability for infrastructure. As we move into furthering the design that will be available to the community, we will have additional community open houses, hopefully in person later in the spring. And at that point, then we will have more information on timeline for public hearings and the processes with the town ComDev department and engineering. There will be a very thorough review with referral agencies and all of the requirements that we typically have in any neighborhood development in the town. There's a few comments and questions about more occupant related items, turnover rates. These are more management related issues. I think we'll just take note of all of those. What's the occupancy? What's the turnover rate? We'll take note of all of those and make sure that as we move through the development agreement process, and also have more information about, you know, the specific unit mix and all of that, we'll be able to tell you all more information about that management situation. I know on Saturday there was questions about how will parking be managed and all of those things. So those are all very important. We're just not there yet.
Thanks, Elena. Yeah, and some of those questions have answers that are found in the town's development code. I just don't know that off the back of my head. Like I said, don't have somebody from community development here, but those regulate, you know, the number of non-related occupants and things like that. I just don't know the answers to some of those questions off the top of my head. I see a question about wildlife impact study and a crime study. Not totally clear what's meant by crime study. With respect to wildlife impact study, that's not something that's that I believe is required as part of the development review process, but it is a concern that we've heard from a few different people, including folks on Saturday. I heard one of the developers say that they have experience with housing developments in areas like this that are you know, close to open spaces with lots of wildlife, and they have built wildlife corridors and things along those lines. I'm thinking that the town can partner maybe with Rocky Mountain National Park or others to help inform us about what the impacts here of developing the site could be to wildlife. I have elk in my yard all the time, and I expect that could be the case out here as well. Let's see. And then Elena answered the question about eligibility verification with respect to working in the Estes Valley.
Oh, go ahead, Jason.
No, please go ahead.
There's a question about the floodplain mapping and FEMA, and yes, that will be updated. The Larimer County GIS is actually still behind in terms of floodplain mapping, and we are getting all the most current information. So thank you for that reminder, but yes, we're on that.
Will there be any study of the increase in resources required by these additional people, schools, police, etc.? I'm not sure that there's actually a formal study that's done, but it's certainly something that's considered as part of the development review process. We expect that with 190 units, there will be children there. That's one of the reasons why the request for proposal, we were looking for a development partner, specifically stated that as part of the development, we would be requiring a space for childcare as part of the development. With respect to police, this is something that our police department, our police chief in particular, are always involved in and interested in, and it'll certainly be something that is discussed whether or not there is some sort of formal study. Why can't people commute in? Well, this is a workforce housing development, and it's designed to house people that work here in the community. So hopefully that addresses that question. What is the maximum number of people allowed per unit? Again, I don't know that answer off the top of my head, but it is regulated in our development code. And that is to ensure that there aren't too many people living in one unit.
For the development impact on the river, we talked a lot about this with residents on Saturday, especially after the floods that have happened in recent years. There's several different things we talked about just from a landscape and design perspective. One person already mentioned impacts that have already been happening on the river. So one of the things that we'll be looking at is floodplain, another is wetlands. A third is stormwater runoff and how that will be interacting or not interacting with the river, how the water for stormwater runoff is cleaned before it enters any other tributaries. There's also an important factor of thinking about right now how there's really not any control over where access to the river can happen on this site, and with the trail that's been put through, that people are confused about the location, and people can come down to the river wherever. We can use landscaping to help direct people to the appropriate locations to access the river, and hopefully help to prevent some of the issues that people are already having now with that. So I hope that helps answer that question.
Yes, thanks, Elena. For feedback from people, were the people local to this proposed site? I'm not sure I followed that exactly, but one of the reasons we held our open house out there on the site on Saturday was to give neighbors, in particular, although anybody was invited, and we did see some people from other parts of town, but it was mostly, I think, neighbors to the site. That was an opportunity to interact with folks working on this proposed project. How many people proposing this development live on Fish Hatchery Road? Don't know. Why this site and why not Dry Gulch? I addressed that a little bit earlier. To be clear, though, Dry Gulch is not out of the question for a potential future workforce housing site. It's just going to be a different process at a different time, and you know, a whole other development agreement process. I'm trying to read and talk at the same time. My apologies. There's a question about how the construction of 190 units here could impact the water infrastructure. The modeling that has been done suggests that there will be minimal impacts to, there will be minimal upgrades needed and minimal impact to the services currently out there. There's a specific question about water pressure. And, you know, as part of the development review process, there are a number of entities involved aside from the town, including the fire department. And this is the question here is about ensuring that we have significant pressure for firefighters. We wouldn't be able to put in a development that reduced the water pressure needed to fight fires. So that is something that has been looked at, and if it's found that, you know, the preliminary modeling is incorrect, then there will be required upgrades to ensure that the services remain the same. See a couple of comments here about the pedestrian trail and connecting it with the existing trail to the Fall River. Well,
the question about building further out of Estes, the town needs to utilize town-owned land to make this happen. If there's land available further out of Estes for workforce housing development, that would be a non-town project. It would come from the county or another development partner. We're trying to meet the needs of our local community to have a resilient community where we can have people both live, work, and play in the town. And so it's really important that we're able to have the workforce local.
Will this increase the rate in crime? I don't know how to answer that question. With respect to parking, that will be part of the development review process. There are requirements and regulations about parking for housing developments like this. And yes, 190 units will certainly add to the traffic there, and that's something that we'll learn more about and have to think about how we can mitigate that through the traffic impact analysis.
But also anecdotally, Jason, local workforce housing does reduce trips from in-commuting that also cause congestion. So it's important to understand and recognize the relationships between having people live locally and the number of trips happening around the community. So it's not just a black and white answer there. It's and that multimodal split and thinking about things like that will be included in the traffic impact analysis.
Thank you for that clarification or addition.
It's important, if you live in a mountain town, you feel all of that, and it's important.
Let's see here. Here's an interesting question. The next one, will current local year-round residents with housing needs be given priority for this housing over bringing more people into the community from outside the community? That's actually something that we haven't discussed yet, and maybe a component of our development agreement discussions. I really appreciate that question because we are well aware of how difficult it is for people who are here or who are working here and want to be here to find housing. So we'll definitely make note of that question. And I'm not sure if there will be a way to prioritize people who work here or live here currently. But I can completely understand that interest in questioning.
And Jason, members of the development team have experience in developing priority leasing processes for local workforce. We had a great discussion on Saturday with some adjacent property owners about teachers and emergency responders and how to ensure that this happens. And so we can work with the town through the development agreement process to get some of that language included to make sure that we are taking care of existing workforce priority.
Excellent. Glad to hear that. And I'll be interested to talk more about it. What is the projected rent level per unit? Will this be ultimately low income housing? So we're targeting AMIs between 60% up to 175%. And I'm not sure what the definition of low income housing is, but in my experience, it's generally around 30% AMI or below. To put that a little bit into perspective, the 60% to 175% AMI. I don't recall off the top of my head, maybe somebody has the table in front of them, but for Larimer County, I believe for a family of 4, that rent is somewhere in the ballpark of $1,800, I think. And then at the higher end, the 175% AMI, that goes up to somewhere around $3,800 a month. This project is not targeting the below 60% AMI. So hopefully that addresses that question. I'm not sure if anybody else on the panel wants to speak to that or has any additional information. Let's see. Somebody says I skipped their question, so I'm going to go up and see the. Address that one.
I'm trying to go through and make sure we've hit things and clearing them out to the answered section, Jason.
If I'm being honest, this is the first time I've been on this end of the Zoom Q&A, so I'm doing my best. The town recently finished the Fall River Trail extension to the park, and for some reason, I think when a question is added, it's moving my thing. So it seems not to appear on your design maps. Are there other plans for that trail? No, that I'm not sure why they're not showing on the design maps, but the
I
town
can
will be-
answer that real quick. We
Okay,
just
good.
didn't have information that was quite that current in order to put it on there.
Okay, thanks, Kara. And there is, we will be maintaining that pedestrian trail. In fact, I think a town staff person noted an interest above in the questions that there's discussion about extending that actually. So that will remain where it is, and we hope to expand it. And then
There's a question about life safety and fire evacuation. Again, this is something we talked a lot about with the residents on Saturday, and we'll be working closely with the fire department. They will be a referral agency and adjacent owners, but the fire department in particular will require that we have 2 points of access, as well as, depending on the size of the building, there could be other requirements for fire mitigation. It depends on their review. When we go into the community development review in the future, there are a lot of referral agencies that are not the town that will be weighing in on how to design the project and how to best address life safety concerns. So that will be a part of our future design.
And then another comment slash question on how to evaluate the wildlife that goes through the area. A suggestion to include asking residents what they see. This is something we are going to be sensitive to. I'm not sure what sorts of formal studies we can do or will be done. We have asked residents what they've seen, and we'll continue to do that for sure. That's where we've heard concerns. I'm concerned about property values along Fish Hatchery. Has there been or will there be any studies on the impact of the project will have on current property values? I don't believe that there will be, or that there are plans to do that. I'm loosely familiar with those sorts of studies, and know that they're very, very hard to predict how development will impact property values.
There's also information on Engage Estes that the comprehensive plan team, which is not this team, has done about the increase in property values over the past several years and the rate at which they've gone up, if you want any background information on that.
Let's see. Recognition that there are a lot of unknowns. How can people speak to the board's decision? There are going to be a lot of decision points that have to go to the town board along the way and throughout the process. And those are all opportunities to share public comment and thoughts, whether it's very high level about the project in general or about something that they are specifically going to be discussing. You can always send emails to town board members or give them a call. You can provide comments using that QR code that'll all be put together and shared with the board at the appropriate times throughout the process. There are you can email townclerk@estes.org with a request to forward your comment or question to the full town board. And there will be other opportunities for community engagement, whether it's in person, open houses, or charrettes, similar to the open house that we did recently, although in the future we'll have more information to share, and other opportunities like this. And I believe that there are some members of the town board currently on this meeting, and we'll make sure also that they're aware of the recording and can view the presentation and hear and see the questions that are asked and the responses.
And Jason, I'll take this next one on the actual project rental numbers. Once we have the unit mix, and then also the final financial structure for the neighborhood, we will be able to provide that information. But if you are interested in Estes area median income, also known as AMI rental rate structure, you can find that online at the Estes Valley Housing Authority, Estes Park Housing Authority. And there's a lot of information that Naomi has available on that site, but that's how rental rates are determined in the community.
Yes, let's see here. So, I just pulled up the table actually, and it's a 4-person, 3-bedroom, what's considered affordable at 60% area median income. And thank you for spelling that out, Elena. I throw out AMI so often, sometimes I forget it's absolutely necessary to explain. What is considered affordable at 60% AMI for a family of 4 is $1,468 a month for a 3-bedroom apartment. So I was a little high, a little on the higher end.
I think there's some questions on assurance given to the public that various studies are conducted in a non-biased manner. And that goes back to the comment I just made about the referral agencies, like the fire department. It's not just the town that reviews studies and analysis. There are many different agencies. And as Jason mentioned, members of the community development department have intentionally not participated in any of the activities to date to create non-biased reviews. And same with other referral agencies. The town includes CDOT, is another one besides the fire department. All of those different agencies are typically required of development review and will be part of the referral process.
Thank you, Elena. How tall will these units be to get that density there? The concept is 3 stories, not 2. With workforce housing, the town allows a density bonus, and that allows you to go up to 3 stories. So you may be able to see the roofs from Fall River Road. And I've heard one thing that I don't know was mentioned on the slide about feedback is I have heard a lot of interest in solar going on the roofs of these buildings, because it's sustainable, the right thing to do in many respects, and also because it would be great to see solar panels from Fall River Road on the tops of these buildings. So I don't see any more open questions. Suzanne, are there any hands raised?
Yep, we do have one individual, Jerry Lauer. I'm going to go ahead and promote you to speak.
Okay, I have a multi-part question, if you will. Number one, do the development requirements, in some developments that I'm familiar with, you need to get an approval of at least half the neighbors that are within a certain distance. Is that something that they do in Estes or not?
No, not for, no, I don't believe
Okay,
so.
the second question I had then is, there are, and I just looked at the development standards a little bit today, but there are setbacks from the river requirements, there's floodplain, all the things we talked about, the wildlife habitat mitigation, a height limit for the development plan, slope restrictions, which I'm familiar with the site, and the slope restrictions will not be okay with the development standards. So my question is this: it's owned by the town, and this goes back to what somebody said before. If there are a lot of variances that are necessary to get this site to work, including things like setbacks, et cetera, does the town board just waive all those? How does that work? If you have requirements, doesn't the town have to stick with those requirements, or can they just give a blanket okay to do whatever they want to do?
No, this will have to go through all of the requirements, and there will not be any waiving of anything. So where there are setback requirements or height restrictions, we are going to be abiding by the development code, just like anybody else who has to go through the development process.
Is it going to be a year-round occupancy primarily, or, and the second part about that, and just real quick, is this going to be the largest workplace development housing in the town?
It will be for people who work here year-round. So presumably they will be living there year-round as well. And I'm sorry, what was the second part? Oh, yes, it will be the largest workforce housing development in the town. I believe Wildfire, which is coming online, is something, I wish Naomi was still here, but I think there are 88 units coming online there. I believe those are a mix of different types of units, not just apartments.
And how did that, is one last question, is the report on how you came up with a number of 190 units, is that somewhere available so we could see and review how it was calculated?
Yeah, yes, if you go to estes.org/Fish Hatchery, there are a couple of different links there. One is to the housing needs assessment that I mentioned earlier. And as part of the request for proposals document that's on the that web page, the RFP, there is a memorandum from our water utility that outlines what that site could accommodate with the existing water infrastructure. There's also a technical report there from the sanitation district. And that's how I said that's kind of a magic number for the north side of the river. Those reports say we can accommodate about up to 200 units.
So you didn't necessarily have the unit number as the driving force. The driving force then was how many units can we put on this property?
Well, I think that, sorry, I was just going to help you out there, Jason. On one of the previous slides about housing needs, the town and partners need to produce 300 to 340 units annually to hit targets. We are falling very short of that from a building permit percentage. And so that is part of the reason why we continue to fall short on delivering the appropriate number of housing units for the community local workforce. And so 190 is still less than that. And if you look at all the projects that Naomi mentioned earlier, those also still fall short of our target number.
Yeah, and there's actually been a lot of interest expressed in maximizing the density on the fish hatchery property. The reality is that if we have to do upgrades to the sanitation and water utility out there, that's going to be very expensive. And again, that's one of the reasons why we're looking at the north side of the river right now instead of the north and south side of the river, because development on the south side of the river would probably cost the developers $2.5 to $3 million extra dollars. And right now, the cost for upgrades to accommodate the units will be minimal.
I did want to thank Donna for her comment about how 84 at Wildfire will not begin to address the current need, and that there are many people in the community that share that perspective. I also wanted to note that as much as we would want to stay on the call all night and do questions, we will have another meeting, but this meeting is going to end at 6:30, and the recording will be available live, and we will be in touch about additional meetings on the fish hatchery site, as well as in all the ways that the town notified everybody to get onto this meeting tonight.
All right, we've got 1 minute left. Let me see if I can get to one more question.
It's Kara's birthday, so we got to make sure that.
Happy birthday, Kara.
Thank you. I will be accepting renditions of the happy birthday song if anyone wants to hang out for that.
Have you considered waiting till you see how the current projects perform before moving forward with this massive plan? The Peak View is the one that's recently come online, and it filled up almost immediately. So if that's any indication, we also know from Wildfire, I believe I heard they've got a waiting list already, but I could be wrong about that. They're very excited about their project and have expressed interest in building more, which they wouldn't be doing if there wasn't a need that was being met. So thank you all so much for taking your Tuesday evening to be with us, ask your questions. Please do utilize the tools that we've shared with you to continue to provide feedback and questions. If you're not already subscribed to receive the town's news releases, please do that, or friend us on Facebook. Those are channels that we get out information about community engagement opportunities regularly. Otherwise, feel free to email me directly, and I'll either answer your question or get you to the right person to answer it. And that's JDAMWEBER@estes.org.
Jason, before we go, Donna does have her hand raised. I'm going to allow Donna to speak really quickly.
That's great. Thank you so much. I've been trying to kind of be a cheerleader for your cause here. I know it's hard to take questions, but you don't have a lot of answers. I'm with the Chamber of Commerce, and I hear firsthand how dire our workforce housing needs. And Jason knows that I'm one who needs housing. So the current solutions are nowhere near sufficient to meet the current need. And we're not talking about summer workforce. We're talking about full-time working professionals in town. And I just want to make sure I had an opportunity to let people know that we're talking about workforce that supports the community and not just our part-time workers downtown. We have a dire need for professional workforce solutions. And I am really concerned too about the people, the residents on Fish Hatchery Road feeling like their needs are being heard and met at the same time. But I just wanted to make sure that the community understands that it really is a dire situation. And these people will not be able to fulfill their roles if they have to drive 45 minutes each way every day. Thanks for what you guys are doing.
I appreciate that closing comment, Donna. It's almost like it was scripted in there. So I really appreciate you chiming in. Sorry, we went a couple minutes over. But again, thank you, everybody. Thank you to the development team, to Kara and Elena. Happy birthday, Kara. I had no idea. As well as Naomi and to Susanna for supporting us during this meeting. We'll have a great evening, and we'll see you next time.